It is officially draft week here for the Pittsburgh Steelers on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're joined by Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to talk about what's most likely to happen with the pick. We'll get into a little bit about some of the players, but there's trade options abound for the Steelers right now. We'll go over those options with Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin set to talk on Monday. We'll go over some of the biggest questions for them and what would be the biggest surprises in the early rounds for the Steelers in the draft, all here on the Monday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers, and we're going to be breaking all things down, all NFL draft all week long, as we have been all offseason, but now it's the week of the draft, so it's time to lock in. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as all of the daily content that comes out from all of the sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And a reminder, we will be doing a live show Thursday and Friday from Mike's Beer Bar covering the first, second, and third rounds of the NFL draft. If you want to be there live, go to Mike's Beer Bar. It's the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you get there, they'll have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. It's the best place to go in Pittsburgh. We'll talk more about them later. But also, if you can't make it to Mike's Beer Bar, let's say you're not in Pittsburgh, guess what? We're going to be doing a live stream of the whole thing right on our YouTube and I believe also on our Facebook Live. So check all of that out by subscribing here on our YouTube channel. Ray, it is draft week, man. You and I have covered up and down, left and right, every possibility as far as the players, the different classes, and all the things they could do, as well as Brian Batko. But I wanted to lead off with you going over different options for what to do with the 20th overall pick as far as how they could use it to leverage to other situations. Because easily the Steelers could stay pat at 20, and you and I have talked about it. There's a lot of really good players that if they stay pat at 20, someone is going to be there. A corner, a tackle, a center, a wide receiver. Any of those four positions should be there with a top player. Even if three of them are rated by the time that they get to there. But there's always the possibility that Omar Khan is cooking something up that we're not seeing right now, whether it's trading up, trading back, or trading a pick for a player like Brandon Aiyuk, as many people have been suggesting over the past month or so. Right. What do you think is the most likely path for the Steelers? Is it staying put, or do you think Omar Khan gets aggressive and makes some moves on draft day?
You know, Chris, I think he's going to be aggressive possibly and make a move for a trade. I'm not going to dismiss that possibility. I just have a hard time seeing them trading away that number one pick because I kind of feel like if the 49ers were going to get their way in this situation, they would have made that deal already, right? Like they were shooting for the stars. Yeah, hey, we want a first round pick. I mean, they didn't come out and say that, but that's kind of what was being reported. Aiyuk for a first round pick. And that's the only way they were going to deal him. But, honestly, by this going into draft week, I think the price comes down for them. So, yes, I still think Omar can do a deal here, but I don't think it's going to be for pick number 20. So having said that, I do think they stand pat. I'm not going to say they can't trade back or trade up this year. They might have to trade up if they really love one of these right tackles like Troy Fautanu or Tailese Fuaga. If they want to get one of those guys, they might have to go up a couple of spots. But as I sit here right now, just because I think given the depth of this tackle class, given the depth of this receivers class, and the depth of this corner class, that they could stand pat and get a good player at number 20 when they do that. And the last time I was on was last week at this time, last Monday. Mm-hmm. Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network did a call last Wednesday afternoon, Chris. Yep. And he was saying it's good in a way. It's not great for team building at this stage, but when you look at the Steelers' needs, needing a right tackle, needing a center, needing a corner, and a receiver, you can actually stand pat and just let the board come to you rather than having that one specific need where you other teams know when you know you have to go get it. So kind of like in a strange way, I don't think it's anything that they planned. They have 4 needs, and they could just sort of sit back and let the board tell them what to do.
That's the thing. I've said this in a few other places too. I feel like the fact that the Steelers have so many needs in this draft class and have done the research that they've done, when you look at who they've had for top 30 visits, who they've visited at their pro days with their top brass, and who they've kind of focused on and with their combine interviews. When you look at all those things combined, this is probably the most mysterious first round pick the Steelers have had in a while. Last year, Broderick Jones was an obvious target, and Joey Porter Jr. was in that, and obviously they got both last year. But Najee Harris was a very obvious first round pick. Everyone was like, okay, yeah, they're definitely picking Najee. Devin Bush was a player that everyone was like, if they can trade up, they're definitely going to go get Devin Bush. They've had those kind of picks over the years. This year, I don't think there's a consensus like, hey, they really, really, really want this guy. I mean, sure, you said about Amarius Mims. He's an offensive tackle who they got a top 30 combine interview, and they went to his pro day, with the top brass. You could look at a guy like him. You could look at a guy like Fautanu. You could look like a guy like Fuaga. But that's the thing, is there's so many of those options. And then there's also guys like Adonai Mitchell, the receiver out of Texas, who was a top 30 visit, a combine interview, and they sent they sent a position coach, or I believe maybe it might have been Martha Smith, but they sent coaches to his pro day. You could look at the center position with Graham Barton, a top 30 visit and an interview at the combine. That's the thing. You could go in so many different directions, and I didn't even bring up all the cornerbacks that they've taken a close look at. And whereas it's not great that the Steelers have so many needs, but I do think it's great that you cannot zero in and say, oh, they're definitely going to do this, because now they can't get sniped like when the Bengals made sure that they took William Jackson III ahead of them in the 2016 draft.
Yeah, that's an overlooked aspect of this process, but you don't want to telegraph it because you don't want other teams to know what it's going to cost for you to move up if you do want to move up and make a deal like that. So that's kind of the cat and mouse game that goes on there. So, yeah, I agree with you, Chris. I do think trading up is a possibility, trading back is a possibility, but I think you nailed it when you said that their needs meet up very well with this draft. They could just sort of sit back and, just pick the best player available at one of those specific positions of need.
And recalling something we talked about on the Friday episode with Brian Batko, he did his worst case first round mock draft scenario where 6 offensive tackles fly off the board, so you can't get one of those guys. But the 2 top centers are off the board, so you can't even get those guys. And the top receivers are off the board, so you can't even get those guys. And it's like, man, okay, those are a lot of the positions that we're talking about here. But guess what? A guy like Terrion Arnold is sitting there available for you. I think Cooper DeJean was sitting there available for you. So you could get a premier cornerback, defensive back added to your roster if all of those things go wrong. And you can still trade back if you want. But I just think the point is that there are more than enough players who are slated to be definite first-round talents at primary positions in the NFL for value and at prime positions of need for the Steelers that set it up so that even if a lot of those targets get taken, somebody will be left at 20 for the Steelers to take.
Yeah, listen, the Steelers got into the playoffs as a number 7 seed, but they lost in the first round. I can tell you there is a big difference, Chris, between picking at 20 and picking between 26 and 28. Let's say they would have won a game or two, right? I mean, that's a big difference. Sometimes the fall off from mid to late mid first round to the latter stages of the first and the second round, it's big. And to have one of those premium picks this year, I think it's important, especially when you look at the way NIL money is changing things. Guys are going back to school more often. So there are some elite prospects at each position, but maybe after day 2, day 3, there's not those hidden gems anymore, in the later rounds. So if you want to get a premium player, it's good to have that pick at 20. And like we said, right tackle, center, receiver, corner, whoever it might be, I think as we sit here today, if they stand pat, they're going to get a good player at one of those positions.
Absolutely. I want to talk about what the Steelers have to answer for themselves right now, because we're recording this Monday morning, but the Steelers are set to talk at noon at their own facility about the draft and take questions from media. I want to talk with Ray about what some of those questions are. We'll get into that and a lot more here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, it's on Federal Street, right across the street from PNC Park, and it's an amazing location. They just renovated the place. It looks awesome when you go inside. They have over 20 televisions, so if you're there watching an away Pirates game or trying to keep tabs on the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, or any other sporting event, they also do Premier League soccer and all the different things around the world. Go to Mike's Beer Bar. They have all the great sporting options. And while you're there, you're enjoying one of 500 different available beers. They have over 500 beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap all throughout the day. And they're always switching new ones in and out, so you can always have a new experience. If you love brews, there's no better place to go than Mike's Beer Bar. And they also have amazing food like steak on a stone, where your choice cut of steak gets brought to you on a heated stone. Every piece you cut off, you just press into that heated stone, and then you choose how well done you want every single bite of your steak. It's an amazing experience. And again, you could join myself there along with other members of the Post-Gazette staff. We'll be doing a live stream event where we're covering the NFL draft. You can drink beers with us and enjoy a great night as we see who the Steelers take in the first round, and then come back on Friday where we see who they take in the second and third round, all at Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you get there, tell them Chris sent you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I think that there's a lot of questions that we could have for the Steelers front office about, directions and what they believe in this class. But I want to build off something that we've kind of heard before from the reporting that we've done here at the Post-Gazette. And that's about how they feel about the center position, because I was there with you guys at the Combine when Omar Khan, mentioned a little bit of position flexibility, but kind of also acknowledged that, Nate Herbig ain't exactly that, all of that. He's not exactly the guy that you can just pencil in as the starter right now. And then at the owners' meetings, I recall it being reported, Mike Tomlin said there's only a handful of centers in this draft class that are plug and play. You could start them right away type of guys. And so when I look at those two things, Ray, there's a lot of people that are going to say, why aren't they taking center in the first round? And I think part of it's, position value as far as where rankings are this year. And if you can get a premier tackle, that's better than a premier center with your first round pick. But I do think one of the biggest questions here, Ray, is going to be about how do they prioritize getting one of the top centers in this draft class if they don't get it in the first round? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big question because, as you know, Jackson Powers-Johnson and Zach Frazier, most mock drafts, Chris, have them coming off the board before number 51. Now, the unknown, the unknown is Frazier's leg injury. We don't have access to the medical reports and, what the doctors are seeing with that injury. So, that's the wild card there. Maybe he slips to the third round, because something, would limit him as far as practicing up until, he's ready as a rookie. So that's the one wild card scenario. But, Mike's right. It's going to be Graham Barton, JPJ, or Frazier pretty much as your plug-and-play guys. That's who the Steelers brought in. The only other center they brought in was Hunter Norzad. And, he's a late day 2, early day 3 type of possibility. I know some people in the draft analyst business are high on him. Mm-hmm. He went to Cornell before Penn State, Chris, but there's been plenty of good offensive linemen to come out of the Ivy League. I think sometimes the Ivy League kind of gets a bad rap for that. But look at Matt Burke. He played at Harvard, and he was a 10, 12-year, very good Pro Bowl type center for a long time in the NFL. So I think sometimes he kind of gets pigeonholed. Oh, he's grad transfer, went to Penn State, did well, but he went to Cornell. So, maybe if there is a guy that is a late day 2, early day 3 possibility that would have some potential. I'm not saying Hunter Norzad would be able to step in right away, but if it's Nate Herbig and then Norzad at midseason or Norzad in 2025, maybe that's the route they go. I think the one thing that people are kind of overlooking in this whole deal about the Steelers cutting Mason Cole, maybe in the end they just thought Nate Herbig was as good or could do as well as Mason Cole, and they were going to be happy one way or the other. Listen, if they don't get a center early, Herbig will just be Mason Cole. That'll be fine. We got to the playoffs with Cole last year. We think we could do it with Herbig. Maybe that's part of their thought process as well.
But that very well might be when you look at how things are. And here's the other thing: like if let's say they get a premier tackle in this class, and then that premier tackle is starting with Broderick Jones on the offensive line, and then you have James Daniels and Isaac Seumalo. That it takes the pressure off the center position to have to do so much. It's part of what we've talked about, in the 2010s. Ramon Foster was not an all-pro guard at any point in his career, but he was a solid guard, and he was at least someone that because Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, and for a time Marcus Gilbert were there, he didn't have to be a superstar. He could be a really good role player, and that could fill in if Herbig / maybe they bring back Mason Cole, maybe they go get someone else who's not exactly higher up, or maybe Hunter Norzad gets the start. But it takes the pressure off of your center to have to lead as much on the line. They're still going to have to make all the calls and do the adjustments at the line. But if you have 4 really strong offensive linemen around your center, and your center is your weak spot, you can kind of cover for that a lot more. I think that's something else that Arthur Smith would be tasked with as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think that's important to note too, because when anyone ever talks about what Omar and Andy want to do, it's always about being physical, getting back to the Steelers way, right? They want to be this team that's built up through the trenches. And I go back to what they did 2010, 11, and 12, right? They got Pouncey in 10. They got Gilbert in 2011 in the second round. And then 2012, you get your other cornerstone piece in David DeCastro. So 3 years in a row, they're using first or second round players. And those guys were decade types players, right? I know Gilbert's career ended a little bit early, but those guys were really good players who were longtime starters. People forget, you mentioned Foster, undrafted free agent starter on Al Villanueva was a starter on those teams. Before Al Villanueva, there was 7th rounder Kelvin Beachum, who was a starter on those teams. So the point is, you cannot invest your premium draft resources every single year in high round offensive line guys. Yeah, the Steelers are going to be forced to do it now, but there's going to come a time where a guy like Nate Herbig maybe has to play a little bit of a role. Maybe Spencer Anderson, Chris, has to play a little bit of a different role if they don't get a tackle early. Spencer Anderson's a guy who's got position flexibility, can play in the pivot. He can play guard. He can also play tackle. He actually played more right tackle in training camp last year than he did any of those other positions, because I think they were just taking a long look at him and, kind of wanted to see, where he fit best. So you can't have 5 first-rounders on your offensive line. You're going to have mid-round, late round, and even undrafted free agents filling out that core group.
Absolutely. I want to ask you here, what's your biggest question? Like you sit down, you get to ask the first question. What's the big first question that you think needs to be answered by this front office and Mike Tomlin heading into the draft?
Well, we just touched on center. For me, Chris, what does Arthur Smith need to be successful from a skill position perspective? Because when you look at it, you deal away Deontay Johnson. George Pickens is really the only high-caliber offensive player who is remaining on the outside. I know Freiermuth is a different cat. I mean, he could actually be your second or third receiver if they want to flex him out and use him in that way. But right now, there's nobody behind George Pickens. You got Calvin Austin, who had a very limited role in his second season in the NFL. You have Quez Watkins, who's coming off an injury-riddled season with Eagles, hasn't really been productive for a couple of years. And a similar scenario with Van Jefferson, a guy who played pretty well for the Rams during their Super Bowl season, but last year with the Falcons was just kind of meh. So to me, you have Pickens as your established number one, and then you have a bunch of 4s and 5s. Who's going to be that second target for Russell Wilson? Who's going to be that third target? To me, that's the question that Omar and Andy have to answer here today with when they meet with reporters. But more importantly, how do they address that Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in the draft?
It's a great question, and I think that's certainly part of that question too is how much do those players get used? Like if the Steelers are going to be a more run first team moving forward, how much does the run get? How much do you invest in the wide receiver position? I agree, getting a second wide receiver is important, but let's say that they get through the first 3 rounds and they have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds and 2 of those picks are receivers. That's exciting. And hey, those could both be guys that make a great trio of wide receivers. But in this offense, when you need the offensive line to be more dominant than anything else, to kind of balance the line of scrimmage and balance this offense and get the run game going, is that the right investment of where to put the picks? And I think that's part of the tightrope the Steelers have to walk is whereas, yeah, they need to replenish the wide receiver room, especially with losing Deontay Johnson. But they also need to keep addressing the offensive line, which they did not do during the offseason. And, and there's also still questions about cornerback and about, and about other positions on the team. Linebackers kind of addressed, safeties kind of addressed, but do they need another young defensive lineman? And again, this goes back to what we're talking about. There's a lot of places where the Steelers need to address things. And whereas it's not great that they have so many things to have to hit on in this draft class, I do think there's a way that they can parlay that into not being as predictable as we've talked about.
Yeah, listen, in Arthur Smith's offense, the number 2 receiver, Chris, might only have 700 or 800 yards, right? So when you look at it, the touches and the running game, Najee Harris on board, and you want to feed Pickens, the important thing for the number 2 guy is, can he get open when you need it? Can he be clutch? And can he be a red zone weapon? So they definitely need a better option at number 2. But that number 2, at the end of the season, you might look at his stats and say, yeah, but I think that number 2 is going to have a very important role in this offense if they are going to be successful, because you need production out of more than just George Pickens. You need that number 2 guy to be a viable guy who can get open, make some clutch catches for you when you need it.
All that being said, I want to talk about things that could catch us off guard, because we're always trying to look at what could happen, and what could happen could be things that we're not talking a lot about. I want to go over what those possibilities are with Ray Fittipaldo, what could be the surprise picks in the Steelers' early rounds in the NFL draft. We'll do that here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, we've talked about the obvious things: tackle, corner, wide receiver, but in center. But as far as the early picks, there's always things that you need to be on the watch out for things that can catch you off guard as far as what directions they can go. Last year, I think, worked out where everybody who they kind of picked in the early rounds, we were all kind of like, okay, we knew that they were interested. We knew they were interested in Keanu Benton, Joey Porter Jr., Broderick Jones, even Darnell Washington. But you look at the early rounds this year, and again, when there's such deep classes at so many different positions, sometimes it can change up how you approach, your draft day if you're in your big board. Is there any player at a position that we haven't talked about a lot that you think intrigues the Steelers enough to maybe be one of those early picks that we don't see coming?
Yeah, listen, there is one position that I'm thinking of here, and my reasoning behind this is the unknown, and that's Cole Holcomb's injury. The 2 wild cards with the top 30 visits. We broke it down last week, Chris. I think 14 offensive linemen, 7 corners, 6 receivers, 6 defensive linemen, 2 inside backers. And those 2 inside backers were Junior Colson and Peyton Wilson, 2 premium players who are likely to go off the board somewhere on day 2, which would be 2nd or 3rd round. So a lot of people aren't talking about it. You give that big free agent deal to Patrick Queen. And Landon Roberts had a very good year last year. But when I look at it, Roberts is getting older. He's in the last year of his contract. And what I mentioned at the top, we don't know about Cole Holcomb. We don't know. We could say, oh, yeah, well, Mike said he's starting to work. Well, but, we don't know what those doctors and those trainers are seeing with that knee injury down there. So, I think if he can come back, he could be your new Landon Roberts in 2025. But if he can't, sure would be nice to have a guy like Peyton Wilson or Junior Colson on your team to develop, wouldn't it?
Certainly it would be. And I think that's an interesting position to look at too. That's one of the groups that I was breaking down on the big board that we put together. And Peyton Wilson, to me, has the potential to be a freak athlete in the NFL if he doesn't have the injury history that he had in college football. And I think that's where, if he didn't have that injury history, Peyton Wilson would be a first-round pick, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. But because of that injury history, there's a decent chance he falls to the 2nd round. And maybe even a chance he falls to the third round. A lot of people see Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M as the top linebacker in this draft class. But Peyton Wilson, his ability, he's long, he's fast, he's explosive, he's quick to change directions. He's a guy that can help you in coverage a lot, which would make things a lot easier for guys like Landon Roberts and even Patrick Queen for them to be more focused on stuffing the run wherever he's on the field. But then let's flip it around. Let's look at Junior Colson. Junior Colson is your traditional run-stuffing linebacker. Like he projects to me more like a young Landon Roberts who's going to come and fill the hole hard. And I think that's also another way to go about it, because Patrick Queen can help against the pass. That's why they signed him to such a deal that he's on, because his flexibility to stuff the run and help cover the pass and show his athleticism there. But having a guy either way, and I think this is the importance of having a guy like Patrick Queen that can do both. When you have that, your other linebacker that you have on the field in your typical formations, when you want to have two off-ball linebackers, they can either be a pass defense first or a run defense first guy. And I think that's where Wilson and Colson differ, in that, Wilson, if you probably want to get in the second, maybe if you can luck into him the third round, that'd be amazing value to get for him there. But Colson's a guy I think will be available in the third round. And that could be a very interesting pick for the Steelers to get a young linebacker. This wouldn't be a Mark Robinson project who'd have to learn the position all over and take all this time learning. I think Junior Colson would be a guy that he's maybe not plug and start, because you still have Roberts, and if Holcomb comes back, that's great. But he would be a guy that would be coming off the bench and giving you some quick minutes and giving you some time to give your guys some breathers at the linebacker level, and someone that you can develop into a future starter in your defense.
Yeah, this goes back to what the NFL values in a run-stopping inside linebacker in a 3-4 defense. If you look at Landon Roberts, he came into the league with the Patriots. He was not an early pick. I want to say he was maybe a third or a fourth round pick, Chris. The Steelers got Vince Williams with a 6th round pick in 2013. He was a very good starter for them in his role. Sometimes he was miscast when there were injuries, but in his role, he was a very good run-stopping inside linebacker. The fact is, you don't invest early picks on guys like this. You don't pay those guys in free agency. I mean, look what they paid Roberts. Roberts came here for $7 million over 2 years. So that's kind of the value that when you're looking to get that replacement for a Landon Roberts. So that's a bigger picture how the NFL views inside linebackers. But listen, I'm all on board. If you can get a guy like Junior Colson or Peyton Wilson with 84 or 98 in the third round, that's tremendous value.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about finding a sort of flexible player in the secondary, and where we can see the Steelers make a play there, because there's, we all know the Steelers could use a slot corner, but could they also use a player who maybe plays safety but also fits on the slot? And a player that I think of like that is Tailese Smith, who the safety out of Georgia, who I think would be easily available in the 4th round. I think Javon Bullard might go earlier, like in the 2nd or 3rd round. But if they could get a guy that can just float around, run with slot receivers, which they don't have on their roster right now. Shannon Sullivan was not, kept on the roster, and that's a hole right now. And they could still also, add an outside corner, even though they brought in Dante Jackson. But I really think a slot corner could be, a slot corner or a slot safety, a guy that can just fill that role. That's something that the Steelers also need to be having their eyes on in these rounds.
Yeah, so again, what's the value of a guy like Cooper DeJean? Very good tester coming off an injury, but he played outside at Iowa. He played inside at Iowa, and there are people in the NFL who thinks he could be a really good safety. So again, those versatile players are really nice to have, but you don't usually put a first-round grade on those guys, right? Those first-round grade guys are guys who can step in and be immediately good starters, at a position like outside corner. So DeJean is rumored to be in that realm, but history kind of tells us that when you're versatile like that, maybe you slip down a little bit. Another guy to keep an eye on, Max Melton from Rutgers. He could play inside, he could play outside. Came in for a visit, 2nd or 3rd round guy. So they need that Cam Sutton type of player. Cam Sutton came in 2017, kind of made his bones as a 6th defensive back until he got into the starting lineup. He was a 3rd round pick, Chris. So you can get those outside safety types like in the 2nd or 3rd round, and I think that may be the direction they go this year.
A note on Max Melton specifically, they talked to him at the Senior Bowl, the Combine, and made him a top 30 visit. They looked at him very closely, which does show, I think, that they're looking at those types of guys. Other corners that they've shown interest in, Mike Sanders still, they talked about the Combine and went to his pro day. Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia, Combine and pro day, and also Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky, Senior Bowl, and made him a top 30 visit. All things that I think point to maybe the Steelers taking a look at that corner position in those middle rounds there. Maybe not in the first round. They are going to look at corner in the first round. Like that's one of those positions that if one of the top players fall to you take a top corner in this draft class. But if you get a tackle in the first and a center in the second, corner is very much in play in the third round, and not necessarily an outside corner. It could be a slot or a guy that can be flexible in all the different positions, like a Melton or a Tailese Smith and other positions. But we'll keep you up to date with all of those things here on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on the North Shore Drive podcast. Ray, thanks so much for joining us here. Read all of Ray's work at post-gazette.com. Ray's got his final mock drafts coming out this week. Be on the lookout for that at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll keep you up to date. We'll have another Wednesday show previewing the draft. And remember, we have a live stream and an event at Mike's Beer Bar on Thursday night of the first round of the draft and Friday night with the second and third rounds at Mike's Beer Bar. If you can't make it down to Mike's Beer Bar and join us with some brews, you could definitely enjoy it from your own house or wherever you watch your podcasts from by tuning into our YouTube channel. We will be streaming live all our reactions and thoughts on the Steelers picks and everything else that happens on NFL Draft Night. We'll see you again here Wednesday on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.